and a USMC veteran. Mark Wise.
First of all, I want to thank Tom for inviting me down here. When I put on my first clinic, that was probably 2007, and we had 4 speakers. We had 3 people show up. Right? I since took over for Tom and what he's built, and I see the state clinic that he had, same thing, build itself throughout. And I know that this is your community of practitioners, and this is something I think you need to take responsibility for and take pride in this regional area. This is something that's going to continue to grow and continue to do things. So again, I appreciate that. I know it's important because again, without networking, without people, none of this works. None of this works, right? Or you just be one of those people that just, sells programs online, and what people understand is that's not what this business is all about. So I definitely appreciate everyone being here. Today we talk about the most cliche title of any presentation ever, but it really is what we talk about with this subject is something that avoids and eludes some of the beginning strength coaches, and this is what I'm talking about. The art versus science. Somebody heard Joe Ken say, and people talk about it all the time. It's almost getting through to everybody that there's a difference between the art of strength and conditioning, the art of sports performance, and the science. Right? And I think where the gap is, and again, we talk about gaps in the industry, one of the gaps being, right, the art and the science. Okay? I'll give you an example. I have written the best program ever to develop explosive speed, strength for my athletes. Right? On paper is phenomenal. I've got all grounds covered when it comes to athletic development. Right? I show up to the weight room and I have 40 lacrosse players, and 30 of them have never even squatted before. So my perfect program is very limited at that point. It's very limited. Okay? It's like the Mike Tyson, quote. Everyone has a plan to get a punch in the face. Everybody's plan works. Every program works on paper. But when you show up to the weight room, that's where you have to adjust. And hopefully, I'll give you a couple things that'll help you. I don't think I'll give you anything groundbreaking. I really don't. But what I might be able to do is give you a couple ideas you may be able to implement in your situation. Probably geared more to coaching athletes in a large setting. But if I am a personal trainer and sharing a facility, some of these things might carry over to your situation as well. So hopefully we can get to that point. Again, why am I up here? I mean, I think if we all were up here, we all could give each other some ideas as far as what can help each other in different situations. But I think for me, I've made a ton of mistakes. And I've been able to at least identify them. That's step one, is knowing that you messed up and knowing that what you've done is not optimal. And then going from there, being able to formulate a strategy to fix it. And I've made a lot of mistakes. And I think the one thing, any situation I've been in, facility is too small. I don't have enough staff. I have too many athletes for the situation. I don't have enough time to train them. All those different things. That's where we can maybe come up together with some ideas to try to help. So really, that's the one thing that, and I think one other thing that has helped me, and I didn't realize it helped me, but for the longest time, in order for me to be a strength and conditioning coach, all but a year and a half of my 15 years of coaching, they were all a strength coach, sport coach, dual role position, which gives another obstacle, but at the same time, gives you a little bit connected on how a sport coach would think about different situations. So hopefully that'll help. And as far as my new position, again, I'm someone that got out of the profession, right, about almost a year ago. But although I miss coaching, my position now as Director of Education, everybody asks me, what does that mean? What do you do? I'm able to, the thing that I found is most of the coaches that are training athletes and training at facilities and at the college, the tactical, the high school level, don't really have a lot of time to do videos and write programs or write articles. So one of the things I think I've been fortunate enough to do is be able to take that information and put it basically in a form that will help other coaches. Because that's the thing. We get information overload, so if we can cut through some of the BS That's one of the probably the main positions that I have. These are the 4 R's that I got from Brian Kane. I'll probably refer to him a lot. This is what I try to do on a personal level. This is also what I think is important for any coach, is number 1, it starts with relationships. Doing the research doesn't mean just reading articles or reading professional journals. It could be anecdotal, but you have to make sure that you're looking at all assets of your resources to try to help your athletes. To be able to report those back to either your athletes, your sport coaches, your parents that you're dealing with, your men, or just in my situation to a larger audience. And then last thing, it has to be results. For me, ultimately, we should sell equipment. For you, it's ultimately going to be performance for your athletes, whatever it may be. But those are the 4 steps that help me, because before I was just kind of going through the motions, and I think it's one of those things that helped me get to where it helps me with the process, I guess. Talk about a couple things, and these are not necessarily all the issues that you have, but these are some of the big ones that come up. Some of them might be in your situation, some of these might be something that you don't have to deal with, so I'll try to be as general as I can, and hopefully it will help everyone. But as far as scheduling, and again, let's just, for sake of argument, I'll go through it like a small college, high school type scenario. One of the things you have to do as far as with your scheduling of your athletes is understanding, you look at Gary's weight room, you look at a lot of weight rooms. Where I have a weight room, and I have basically a small field inside of the weight room. That can eliminate a lot of obstacles you have, okay? I was in a situation where I was in a small school, we had weight room, you walk 10 feet, you're on a track. When I went to West Point, we were in a separate facility. They have a 20,000 square foot facility. I was in a smaller 6,000 square foot facility. I had no fields, no tracks, no anything near me. So as far as scheduling wise, I always had to schedule strength training and speed and agility training as separate sessions. Right? So it's just one factor to understand, is that you might want to do your speed stuff before strength, because that's what you've read and that's what you think is going to be the best. You might not be able to do that. You have to be adaptable. And that's the common theme is going to be being adaptable. The one thing I learned from Todd Hammer, he writes for our site, but he's a good friend. He's the head strength coach at Robert Morris University. And one thing he said was, if someone ever asks you to write you a program, they want you to write them a program, one thing that it's really difficult to do without knowing what equipment you have. My programming were vastly different based on the weight room that I was coaching in. That makes sense? And it's got to be the same for you. You might be a kettlebell guy. You might think that's the answer, right? But kettlebells aren't cheap, and if you don't have them, you're going to have to find some other ways. I was an Olympic lift guy. I go to West Point. Guess what? My weight room had no platforms, no bumpers. So I had to either adapt or I had to find another way. So again, your equipment will dictate your programming. People think it's the other way around. You can't. You have to know what you're dealing with first. And then basically, who uses the facility? This is the NARPs, the non-athletic regular people. Sorry. It's a college term, I'm sorry. But one of the biggest frustrations, at the Division I level, they don't have to deal with this, right? At some high school levels, they don't have to deal with it. But a lot of places, you have to deal with who else is sharing your facility. And it's a two-way street, right? You don't want to walk in, I have a whole entire team, I'm sharing, it's an open facility. You'd be amazed at how many schools are set up that way. But I walk into the facility, and I have an entire team to train. I got a basketball team to train. I have one guy, in the squat rack. He's not squatting. The other way is I am just trying to get my work. I have a workout plan. I want to get better. I might not play a sport, and all of a sudden, an entire team comes in to train. Right? My workout just got ruined. Anytime you can have separate facilities, it's vitally important. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So if you don't have a situation where you have set times and you don't have separate facilities, you're going to have to be even more creative. Talk to a minor league baseball strength coach. You want to talk about adaptable. Those dudes, and Tom was a minor league strength coach, those dudes are as adaptable as anybody, because they go to a new city and they might have a deal with the YMCA that they can train their whole team in there at 11 o'clock in the morning, right? I'm just, making up an example, but
no, that's true.
you have to. I knew you were a baseball player, so that's That's how, so you can say all you want about what you want to do, but you got to be able to make adjustments. I just looked at the facility. I got to make an adjustment on this workout. We go through as far as coach-athlete ratio, and again, this is something that's important. And again, if you have a team, if you have 40 athletes at once, or you're training someone one-on-one, it's gonna, this model here is something that I think, is adapted a little bit, but from Greg Cook, but really you're looking at, competency. Can they do the basic movements first? Then you go through proficiency, the capacity. Capacity is something that people don't, they misuse that general fitness quality. Capacity just means I should be able to do 3 sets of 10. I'm not saying that's the best way to do things, but if I can't do that, I might not be able to do heavy triples, right, if I'm working out. So if you look proficiency, capacity, complexity, again, I have to have a base before I get into more complex issues and in mastery. You probably never get there with some of the populations you work with, but those are some of the things that when you're thinking about it, am I competent to do this? Am I proficient at it, right, with coaching, and then you work through it. So a couple more factors. As far as what season, here's the biggest paradigm with the seasons. The team that usually has the biggest priority is a team that doesn't prioritize training. So the team that has the schedule priority isn't really worried about their in season. So their training is not a priority, as opposed to that off-season team. That team that's, football team in January, or, whatever it may be, basketball team at this time. They are last choice when it comes to the weight room because, again, they have less flexibility in their schedule. But it's the most important part of the year for training for them. So you see how that paradigm works? It's just something you have to be cognizant of and just make sure you understand. That's why there's a couple things with practice training preference. This is something that when you communicate with parents and coaches, especially sport coaches, this is one thing that will help you. When you look at with the best way, the most efficient way, and the most, in my opinion, is to have a separate training session that is either a couple hours before, a couple hours after practice, right? We used to try to get a couple meals in between. So if I'm lifting at 8 a.m., I get lunch, I get dinner, I practice after a snack, whatever it may be. But again, having separate times, probably the best way. It's the most inconvenient for sport coaches, and that's where you run into. It's the most inconvenient for everybody because, again, it's much easier to just get a quick lift in before practice or get a quick lift in after, right? So I'm going to practice for 2 hours and I'm going to be explosive in the weight room, okay? It's usually not going to happen. So that's one of those things I think you have to just be aware of. Obviously, try to do it before practice. The funny thing is you're going to have coaches that say, well, I don't want them tired for practice after the lift. I'm thinking to myself, what would I be doing to make them that tired for a practice? What am I going to do in a weight room that's going to get them tired out for a 2.5 hour practice? And I think that's come to communication, right? And again, I mean, really, are you going to be doing some high rep, hypertrophy-based, strength endurance-based programming before practice? I don't know if that's smart. The best thing to do is, again, if you're looking at just simple bioenergetics, for lack of a better word, trying to do explosive movements before practice, even explosive heavy stuff if you're training before practice, and then do your strength endurance, your not prehabilitation, but your basically your circuit work, some of your upper body, heavier movements maybe after. Just be aware of when your program is, when that practice is placed. And you're going to have to be the one to adjust the volume for practice, not the other way around, right? Unless you have a really good relationship with the sport coach, to say, listen, they have a heavy workout today, I need you to just keep it down with practice today. It just usually doesn't happen that way. And then frequency, one thing you can't be afraid of, lower frequency training sessions during the year, right? Even in the off-season, you can get away with, you may be able to do 3 days as opposed to 4. You may be able to do 2 days as opposed to 3. And again, we had a lot of sports that did 2 days a week, right? I'll show you some of the templates that we went. It doesn't mean they weren't magical. They weren't. You probably maybe have a better idea, but we had to separate things up into 2 training days because if I did the math, right? 23 sports, how many athletes you had with, the day, if it's an hour-long training session, okay, when you add up the hours, right, and the amount of athletes you had, and the capacity of our weight room, mathematically it just wouldn't work out, right? I mean, if you add a third training session for 500 athletes, right, you see how the math works? So again, 2 days a week, you can't be afraid of that. So that might be something that, under your situation, might be a better thing. So I'll give you some ideas. It doesn't mean you have to do 2 days of training, but it could be an option for you. All right, so program design. This is a hot topic because, again, everybody has I love the online programs, the people that do programs online. They just send you one and then you send it back and then they make adjustments. That's a new thing now, I guess. So it's hard for me to imagine programming someone that I don't see trained. I guess with video stuff, I guess you can do it, but it's just a little bit sort of different. Gary alluded to it today. I know Michael even said something about it with the needs analysis. Here's the one thing: if you're not doing a needs analysis, you shouldn't be training anyone, right? It's just basic. And then I don't think it's more, it may seem complex, but you're looking at, again, how the athlete moves in a sport, right? What energy system, and again, that's another buzzword. Everybody, you want to act smart, write an article about energy systems, right? Because we use all of them all the time for most athletic endeavors. But really, you have to have an idea as far as what is a predominant energy system that you're using. When you assess the athlete, you're looking at training age versus chronological age. That's what Michael had alluded about. Just because you have a 20-year-old freshman or a 20-year-old college athlete doesn't mean their training age is, 10 years. That might only be, they might have not trained until they got to college. You've seen it. You have some people that are really good athletes that get there, they never had to train. So when they get to the university, their training age does not match up with their chronological age. It's not the end-all and be-all, but it's something that you have to be aware of. Injury history, I know we alluded at on the round table. And then the sports played as far as when you're looking at compensation patterns, right? If you have someone that had played hockey, we had a football player that had hockey. Well, guess they have some different things going on, especially with the hips, with internal rotation and whatnot, especially because he was a goalie. You have someone like a baseball player. You're going to have some overuse things that are going to come up. People that ran cross country, right? Those are some of the things you just have to be aware of. And I don't know if you have to, when you're designing programs, that has to be step one. Look at the sport, look at the athlete, and look what they need. Not what you want to do, but what they need. I'm going to go through this quickly because, again, I'm only trying to give you a couple of different ideas. The second step is basically choosing exercise categories, in my opinion. And these are movement-based, right? We're not necessarily training muscles as much as we're training movements. So again, are these pretty elementary? But for us, it was a double leg push, a double leg pull, single leg push, single leg pull. Those are the lower body movements that we felt pretty much encompassed. I know you can be more specific, but we were able to make up categories that we want to address. So again, I'm going to have an exercise for this category, and I'm going to implement this category within the program. Again, total body, that's for strength training purposes, it was a triple extension, it was a rotational, and then for upper body, horizontal push-pull, vertical push-pull. And I understand you have the incline, but I understand there's things that don't fit in those into those holds directly, but that was one way to separate. Those are the basic movements that we want to implement in a program. How you do it is going to be up to all the other factors we talk about. The next thing is, again, the exercise pool for each category. A good book, one of the first books that I know that Tom and I talked about that we read. Joe Ken had the Coach's Strength Training Playbook. Anybody familiar? It's old now. It's over 10 years old now. He's supposed to be writing a new one soon. But he goes through an annual plan as far as how to come up with your exercise pool. And this is basically what I'm talking about. If I'm looking at a squat variation, and people that are in with a kind of a conjugated concurrent periodization scheme, or that's what you've used before, this may seem a little more familiar to you. But if you're looking at a double leg push, for an example, let's just say predominantly it's going to be a squat. Maybe it's a leg press. It's up to you, up to your facility. I didn't do leg presses, but I went to Army. We had 6 of them in the weight room, or 4 of them in the weight room. So guess what? We did leg presses, right? It didn't kill, it didn't hurt anybody. It was just that was the tools we had to use. So if I look at double leg push and I try to implement what movements or what squat and leg press variations I'm going to use based on a couple things. Based on my equipment, based on the athletes I'm training, based on the time of year, all those factors come into play. For us, again, we would always, for example, depending on what athletes we'd have, if they were, certain sports would do certain things, certain times of the year they would graduate up to different double leg movements. For us, in season, they always squatted on a box, no matter what. Right? I felt breaking up that concentric, eccentric train actually added and helped them with recovery. So we'd always do boss squats. That was just time of year. We'd free squat when they were in the off season, we'd boss squat in season. That's going to be up to you. I'm not telling you how to run your program, but what happens is if you add those exercises in there now, and I'll talk a little bit later about why it's important. So again, coming up with an exercise pool within each category. This is something we did, and it was just basically having an intent for each week, right? I know that most people nowadays, it's almost set in stone that you have to deload on week 4. 3 weeks in a deload, no matter what. That's what you heard, because that's what everybody does. And I think that one thing that I was able, when I was in the Army in 2005, 2006, one of the things we did was we really kind of tested when we were having a plateau in weights. And it ended up being, and this is again, this was just my observation, and this is just kind of the small pool of athletes that I worked with, but we looked at the older the athlete was in training age, the more frequent we had to deload. And I know Dave Tate talked about, when I say that, he had a long article on supplemental exercises. And that rotating those exercises, the more advanced you are, the quicker you can adapt neurologically to that stimulus, right? Don't know that. Young athletes, you can have them do the same program for months, and they're going to make gains. So, hashtag that gains. So you have a system where you have, with the deload weeks, we found that, again, the younger they were, the less frequently you had to deload, right? Just be careful about deloading, especially working with young athletes. Ask yourself this question: what exactly are we deloading from? Make sure that your athletes that you're working with are working hard enough to warrant a deload. Does that make sense? Are you sure you need a deload? If not, oh, you're going to get hurt. Well, make sure you're doing things for the right reason. Ask why. So again, I'm not against deloads. We would do different things though with the deload. We wouldn't just do this, because the problem with the deload is this, right? My perceived rate of exertion. Have you heard of RPE? Right? I'm going to approach a deload week saying, okay, this is going to be a light week for me. This is going to be easy. I'm doing 70% for a couple sets of 5. So what happens is, because of my approach and my mental approach to that, oftentimes that weight feels way heavier than it should. Now all of a sudden, I've actually exerted more force, and from a central nervous system standpoint, I actually have done more work than I needed to do. I didn't get the stimulus from a musculoskeletal system, but from the central nervous system, I actually am in a situation where it was more taxing on my system. Right? So again, just be careful about deloads. I can talk forever about that. But based on your schedule, as far as where your test week is, I'm not a big test guy, but the test would be the last week of the cycle. Here's one thing. If you're a linear periodization person, so you're going to just basically the same exercise for a certain week. And this is an example of a 5-week schedule. If you're looking at a 5-week schedule, if I look at the third column, which says 1 exercise, that's basically linear based, right? And if you're a straight linear based system, you could probably go 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, right? Again, inverse relationship between intensity and volume. The cycles I like to do is just a little bit different, so that's why we end up doing what we did here. An intro phase, 70, 80, 85, drop to 75, and then back to 90. Like the 5-3-1 thing, I'm not a 5-3-1 deload guy, I'm more of a 5-3 deload 1. Right? That's just my preference. That's what I've seen work for performance. Doesn't mean that, I'm not going to have arguments with obviously anyone, but that's just kind of your personal, based on what you've seen with your athletes. And again, one thing you do is based on how many exercises you input, you can go ahead and say, okay, for an intro week, we're going to go ahead and do a goblet squat. We spent less time on teaching progressions and more time on doing an exercise that's going to help that athlete perform the exercise better, right? So since it's 20 on a goblet squat with a dumbbell, I had plenty of dumbbells, and I'm able to coach on the fly. as opposed to taking a whole week, teach them how to squat with body weight when they have an external load and everything, all their technique cues go to crap anyway. Bless you. Right? So that was one of the things we did. We assigned a exercise to a specific week. Right? Not saying that's just another way to kind of look at it. Here's a 2-day split. If you're in season, right, or if you're not in a situation where you can do this, eliminate the blue. And then if you're looking at our 2 days, we have triple extension at the beginning. Then if you're looking at basically a vertical push, double leg push, single leg pull, horizontal pull. Right? Day 2 being another triple extension with, I'm not saying you have to Olympic lift, that's just an example. But now you have a double leg pull, a horizontal push, a vertical pull, and then a single leg push. Does that make sense? There's your 4 and 4, how we mix it up. Do you have to do it that way? No. Know why one of the reasons why we did it that way is we overhead at the same time as squat because the bar's already set up that way. That sounds crazy, but that's what we did. I'm not saying. And then we would be able to use the same setup from a clean to an RDL. So that's kind of why we did it based on our situation. 3-day split, same categories now, split up to 3 days. This is, I know, I'm not trying to be condescending to you, but this is just one thing to think about, having a set. For me, I don't know if you feel that you want your athletes doing a horizontal push twice a week because it's that important for you, you have to make that adjustment. But for us, we had very limited time, right? And a lot of you do. You have very limited time, so we didn't know if we wanted to do the same movement pattern or movement category more than once. That's up to you. 3-day split with option 2. This is basically what we have for a lot of athletes is we had to reserve a separate facility for speed training. So we had basically day 2, day 3 would be our basically strength training workouts in the weight room. Day 1 was on a separate facility. If we had half of our teams, say that's basically day 1 being a Monday, day 2 being maybe a Tuesday, and then day 3 being a Thursday. If you had it so that we would do a speed session later in the week, you could just swap those days. Does that make sense? Because we don't want to, slide the day after, you know what I mean, was just one of those things we didn't want to do. So that's just one way, that's a 3-day split. Now, I'm not log jamming a weight room, but now I have to find time at another facility to go ahead and do the speed work. And I'll give you some ideas as far as how to do that. There's a 4-day split. We've also done we take all the speed stuff and do another day in the morning. So 2 on Monday, 1 on Tuesday, 1 on Thursday, 1 on Friday. Simple D1 split. I'll go through some trade training, and again, organization being one of the main things, and I know it's hot in there. I know we're all sweating a little bit, just bear with us. Couple things. Complexes and coupling. Here's the one, Gary gave me an example, right? I have 4 platforms, right? I have 50 athletes. Well, one thing I can do is I can have, a group doing cleans on the platform, I can do a group doing, I can rotate the room. But now the problem is, you have different athletes or different teams doing a different order, right? So it's hard to really kind of get a grasp on things. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Well, why do I get to squat last, per se, right? So one of the things we did is that if you have large groups, like if you have a group of 5 per station, say you have a group of 5 for each rack. We thought instead of splitting those up, we thought we'd rather have 5 or 6 for a rack and then we'd give them kind of a rotation through. So again, coupling some reactive, some mobility, some stability stuff after strength training was one thing we ended up doing. Don't get married on the fact that I have to do jumps before I do heavy stuff, right? There's a lot of, if you look at a lot of stuff that Caldees is doing, there are some benefits from doing explosive movements after heavy movements. So one thing we did was, again, you have an athlete in a rack, they're squatting. As soon as they're done squatting, they rack a bar, they go to their jumps, right? They wouldn't have a spotter for jumps. It depends on how many we have. They go from that to a prehab. T-spine mobility, ankle mobility, whatever it may be. Then they're back, and then they're spotting. So they go from spotting to lifting to jumping, and they would just go through that rotation. So now all I had to do is I just needed to have a box. And don't get me, please, don't be the let's set up boxes as high as possible, have a running start, knee ourselves in the face so we can land on it. That's a test of how flexible you are, right? doesn't matter. If you jump as high as you can, that is the intent of doing jump training, right? So it doesn't matter how the athlete land in a good athletic position. So don't be one of those people that want to stack up boxes on boxes on boxes or bumper plates on boxes just to see how high you can jump. Test your vertical, right? That's what it's for. So that was one way to do things. Coupling those, right? After a set of dumbbell snatch, get through and do some basics, some T-spine mobility, hurdle drill. Then get back on the dumbbells. And I'll show you a way to kind of do a dumbbell training in one drill. Exercise selection, and again, this is one of those things that is probably, you have to fight as a training coach. You have that creative gene in you that wants to really get as much variety as you can to help those athletes. You have to fight that as much as you can to get the best basic training adaptation. So again, it was one of those things. Olympic lifts is a big thing, right? If you're not really qualified to teach them, okay, and you can find other ways to develop explosive power that's not going to take as long to teach, do that, right? I know there's some Division I programs that might take 4 weeks. I know when I was at Tulsa, it was like 4 weeks of just teaching before they actually put weight on the barbell with Olympic lifts. You may not have that amount of time. You have to make that decision. Am I going to have the best results with the time I have? Exercise variations. This is one thing. Being a conjugated guy, being someone that likes to rotate exercises in, my thing is, again, because of if I'm going to implement cleans, for an example, I feel that if I can do a week of cleans from the hang, a week of cleans from the floor, and a week of cleans from the blocks, I might be able to address some weak points from a technique standpoint and from a muscle and balance standpoint, right? For example, if I have athletes having trouble with getting parallel on a back squat, and tell me that that's not an issue, right? Put a bar on someone's back and have them get a parallel squat with a good posture. That's a challenge for everybody at every level. Have them front squat for a week, right? They're still squatting, but that technique and that muscle and balance, addressing those can lead to added performance in one. One will help the other. Does that make sense? So again, making sure that, again, if you're doing it, don't just add variations of exercise just to do it, because it's cool. Make sure it has an intent. And again, I probably talked for a long time about that, but that's make sure you have an intent for everything you're doing. And again, this is the last thing. Anytime you're doing exercise variations, make sure that, again, that they're close enough that one exercise is going to help the other, but not too close together biomechanically to add in just another a motor pattern to learn. Let me give you an example. Cleans from the floor in deadlifts, conventional deadlifts. To me, I never wanted to put them in the same workout, right? They are close enough to each other, right, to get those two confused, right? Does that make sense? So again, it was clean from the floor, trap bar deadlift, or hang clean and conventional deadlift. It was never mix those up, because one might inhibit the other from a technique standpoint. It's like throwing a baseball that's a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter. It's the same thing. The technique is different. If you're doing it the same way, if you're doing cleans and deadlifts the same way, we probably got to talk afterwards. The other example is different hand. This is another thing. Different grips and different foot placements, different bar placements. I get really crazy when people talk about we'll do low bar squats and high bar squats, or I'm going to do a wide stance, narrow stance, and I'm not talking about different movements. Right? I'm talking about just different variations, right, with just the grip. You don't have enough time with some of your athletes, unless you are training for powerlifting or training for Olympic lifting, right, to add so much variety that you need as many reps, as many movement pattern reps as you can get to get those athletes to master. So don't worry about low bar, high bar, so do a U squat. Whatever way that they are going to produce the most force, whatever way they're going to get parallel in a good athletic position, in a good position at the bottom, that's what you want to do, right? Make sure that, again, with the grip on the back, you don't have to change. Keep the same motor pattern over and over and over again. If you want some variety, well, then you can add change. You can add band, whatever that might be. But again, for variety's sake, I don't want to change the technique. If I'm teaching a front squat, it's a different movement, right? But again, the technique, everything I'm teaching should be the same. That makes sense? And again, that's probably debatable and up for discussion with relays. Make sure they're not too similar. Okay, I'm going to fly through this stuff because there's some stuff I want to get through later on that might help a little more. Separate your workouts into blocks so you have a different focus and emphasis for those 4 blocks. For us, block 3 and block 2 could probably change around depending on what you're doing. So now I'll tell you how the blocks come into play. Block 1 being movement prep. Gary talked about not saying the word warm-up. These, for us, these are 4 issues that are 4 components of movement prep. This is all terminology. You might have different terminology when you're talking about this, but for movement prep, this is what we felt was the most applicable for what we wanted to do. Soft tissue work. Again, here's 2 different ways to do this. Right? For equipment, don't get married into one piece of equipment. Don't assume foam rolling is the only thing you can do. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can have everybody doing foam roll on day 1, and then day 2 everybody does PVC pipe or whatever. The problem is most people don't have that much. Might not be able to buy 40 foam rollers. Okay? So this is a way to grab a couple extra softballs, take 2 lacrosse balls, tape them together, buy some PVC pipe from Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever. I have barbells already set up, and I could get a couple foam rollers. Now I have a rotation. One of the things that made me sick about our workouts was, as soon as our athletes got there, they're all about foam rolling. The problem with that was, the whole first part of them showing up for the workout, they're laying down and just rolling and talking and BSing. It set us up for not the kind of work ethic that we wanted. So doing this in a rotation, whatever you have, and timing them, right, might be a better option. Now here's all that's going to come into play. So you have another group that's doing a dynamic warm-up. Do you have to warm up to foam roll to do soft tissue work? No. Should you be warmed up to do soft tissue work? I'm sure there's research that says one's better than the other, but in the grand scheme of things, you can separate those up in the station. You can have a group doing dynamic warm-up. For dynamic warm-up, I'm with Gary. Foot ladders, they're for warm-ups, that's it. Please, that's the problem with this country. We're moving our feet real fast, but we're not really going anywhere. Right? It's kind of a microcosm of a lot of things that I'm not going to get into that. But the other thing was like hurdle drill leg swings. This is what we did with hurdle drill, right? You have racks in your weight room. Okay? Hopefully you do. You have safety catches on your racks. I hope you do, right? Unless you're like Olympic based and you're just teaching them to drop. 1 up, 1 down. You have a hurdle. You have basically an over hurdle and under hurdle. And set up your racks that way. Okay? You can actually put bands around the J hooks and set up your hurdle drills that way. So if you don't have hurdles, like the large hurdles, that's one way to do it. Do it inside of your racks, either with the safety catches or set up a band around the J hooks. Now I have basically a band there, and I can do my. Basically, here's a typical one. Ready? 30 seconds. Here's our whole warm up. Have a team on there. Everyone does full quickness together. Usually we would do line drills or dot drills because we can do everybody at once. Then we go through. You go through the hurdles, right? Whatever we had. Lateral duck under, rotate to a lunge, and then lateral step over. They go through it. As soon as they get through it, leg swings, overhead squats, back to the beginning. So if I have 4 hurdles and a team of 20, I don't have waiting around. That's the thing that would drive me insane, was people standing around. So that's one way to do it, instead of having a whole team. And listen, you don't have to, training athletes is not like, it doesn't have to be, give them some ownership on what they're doing, right? So again, and if you need protocols or whatever, I will go over. I'll show you exactly what we do. Mobility stuff, we concentrate on these 3, okay? Because you know the basics Mike Bull, right? Every other joint needs either stability or mobility, right? Foot stability, ankle mobility, knee stability, hip mobility, right? You go all the way up. Does that make sense? Same thing with this. We thought that, again, just to pinpoint, with ankle mobility, T-spine mobility, hip mobility, and then we actually had a sleeper stretch because we had a lot of overhead athletes, right? Because again, we were looking at volleyball, lacrosse, whatever. We would add that in. Sometimes we take it out depending on the sport. If you add those 3 in, so it might be hurdle drill, go to a simple, put your foot against the wall, right? Ankle drill stuff, ankle mobility type drills. But again, getting real cute with this, right? You're not a physical therapist, you're a coach, and you don't have to go overboard with some of this. It's just a couple different drills we would do, and it's based on equipment. So So you can do a T-spine drill, just putting your elbows on a bench, right? And working a couple of different things. So it's one of those things that would have a lot of, remember, anything you do before the workout should have a acute effect, so it should help me for my workout, but it should also have a cumulative effect and help me for postural, alignment issues and whatnot. So those are one of those things that we would do. And then our prehab stuff, again, this is based on where you are in the season. I'm not going to go into these because it's just going to take a little bit too long. But we end up doing a lot of things. We started to do our core stuff, it's a buzzword, torso training, whatever. But we end up doing just some kind of stability, right? Plank on a stability ball, some kind of anterior rotation, a power press. It was really one of our main things, and that's all we did for it. We wouldn't do anything else for it. For at least we knew we addressed that at the beginning. And then everything else, we did a lot of band work, we rotated. So the same thing. That can be a whole circuit, or it could be a circuit in itself, or a circuit along with everything else. If you're in season, it might not be as necessary to do that. Again, I'll blast through these things. We would go through, again, when you're talking about rack and method, to steal a term, throws, jumps, and then you have your Olympic lifts. We would rotate those in because, again, the problem is if you're doing a lot of jump training, make sure, again, that you may not have to do as much Olympic lifts if you're doing a ton of rotational power work and for jump training. So I'll skip that through. Here's something we did that might help you. Equipment-based training. I'll give you the scenario. I'll give it to you this way. 4:30s on Tuesday, Thursday, I had 5 teams at the same time. So I had men and women's soccer. Men's tennis was finishing up at that time. We also had volleyball. We also had field hockey at that time. So we had to train everybody at once. And you know how most weight rooms are set up. If you have a rack, platform, and a full dumbbell set, right, and a full kettlebell set, whatever, pretty good setup. If you have 20 of those, awesome. You can train anybody. The problem is most weight rooms aren't set up like that, right? They have individual platforms, right, and then they have a dumbbell area, right? So 12 platforms, 1 little dumbbell area. So it was almost a waste for us. The one thing we do is we felt that if you look at that normal 2-day schedule that we had, we thought that we could do barbell stuff on both of those. And we thought we can do one workout with nothing but dumbbells, one workout with nothing but kettlebells. So what ended up happening was we had one team on one half of the weight room and barbell, one team on the other half of the weight room, one team in front of the dumbbell area, which was separate, and one team took the kettlebells back to the rec gym. And now we have 4 teams working. And they never had to go, because that's what really hurts you in time, getting exercise density, is the transition. So for example, there's your 2 barbell, workouts. And then for a dumbbell and kettlebell, what happens is if you look at the dumbbell, it's going to look like barbell 1. You're going to have a snatch, you have an overhead press, you have a squat, you have a row, a horizontal row, you have an RDL, right? And you look at basically barbell 2 and kettlebell, it was similar. So if you went through a 4-day rotation with that, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever, you're able to hit those components each time, right? So if I go through those 4, at least I squatted twice, right? I did a horizontal press twice, all those components were addressed. It didn't work out perfect, but that was just one of the things we did. And then we also have kind of like a landmine. We had like a core blaster that we had. Same thing. That was basically, now you have just a different, that's one more. So we have all the old barbells that are kind of bent that you're not using. What do I do with this? I don't want to throw it away. Lay it on the ground, put it in a corner, or if you have an attachment for it, use that, and all of a sudden now you can use those. So now that's 5 different stations, and you can put them somewhere. You can put them out in the hallway, just lay them on the ground, put a bumper plate on it, and you're able to do some different movements. So that was one thing to do, because now athletes don't have to move. They do everything right there, right? Everything is right there in that area. I'll give you a couple things. These may apply for you, these may not. I know that's kind of hard to see. And I can email you this presentation, grab this, steal whatever you need. But one of the things that we try to do is that when you had a small dumbbell area, it was hard to get a bunch of athletes working at the same time. You know how many times I've spent with athletes, like, okay, who has the 20s? Do you have the 20s? Who has the 20s? It was just, it never ended. It just drove me insane. So what we end up doing is taking a dumbbell, sitting on the ground. So if we're lucky we had 4 of each dumbbell. So you put a 25. This example has 2. We had 4. Sometimes we had 3, sometimes we had 5. Didn't matter. and you just set it on the ground, right? Make sure you had enough space in between these 3 feet, put another one on the ground. So we have a long area of the track that we just set those dumbbells out there. And then we just have the athletes come in line, they would step up. If it's set on my workout sheet, right, we're calculating, we're recording all this. On my workout sheet it said, I need to do 30s for a dumbbell snatch or push press, whatever it is. I'd step up to the 30s, get in line, do my workout, put it down, get back in line. If I went from like 30s to 35s the next set, I was able to get into the next line. And it was easier to do it that way because, again, we get more athletes working at once. And everything we did was single arm. If you do all your exercise with dumbbell with single arm, it doesn't necessarily make your workout shorter, but what it does is it gets more people working. It cuts down rest ratios, and it gets more people working, right? Because if us four, right, if us four have one dumbbell, okay, or 8 of us have 2 dumbbells, I mean, if us four have 2 dumbbells, we're doing whatever, presses with 2 dumbbells, right? That's a 1-to-3 work ratio, work to rest ratio. But if we have one and you have one, now all of a sudden it's 1 and 1. Now it's going to take time because I have to do both arms. But now I'm getting the unilateral effect. Obviously it's going to be some beneficial to me. So, commitments is something I got from Sean Griswold when he was at Tulsa. And I'm sure he got it from other people, but this is one of those things that just circuits. Aaron Hillman had body shop stuff. I mean, a lot of people do it. So anything that's like non-quantifiable that I need to get these athletes doing extra posterior shoulder girdle work. Who does not need that? Name an athlete that you have. Name a sport you have that doesn't need some more work on the posterior shoulder girdle. So we end up having circuits. Make sure they're non-quantifiable. That way you don't have to worry about on the workout. And now it gives, and if anybody wants these commitments, I have a ton of them. I can send them to you. Now you have a ton of different circuits that you can do that you don't have to worry about. Am I worried about that someone goes from YTLWs, they go from 12s to 15s? Right? You don't want to worry about it. So with the commitments at the end, all those different things, now all of a sudden, it's another opportunity for you to see who the leaders are in your group. Does that make sense? Okay. I will go through this quickly. I'm not going to talk about speed training, right? As far as technique, whatnot. I will talk about some setup stuff that might help you. Okay. I got like probably 5 minutes left, so I'll go through this. Right? This isn't any different. The POW concept, posture, arm action, leg action. Only thing I'll say, 2 takeaway points, because I'll adapt this. 2 takeaway points. You're doing arm action stuff, right? Do it seated. Or I'm sorry, don't do it seated. Don't do it seated. Sorry. It's getting hot here. Feel a little woozy. Don't do it seated. What happens is this, anytime you're doing it seated, I have the ground there, right? What coaches say is that I'm doing it seated so that I keep a good bend in the elbow. And what happens is I start to elevate my shoulder. So this is my seated, right? What I really want them to do is be able to, right, hammer that hand down. So if you're doing arm action drills, start with straight arm, do it standing, do it kneeling, whatever. But make sure, again, that that ground is not helping technique, it's actually hindering it. And the other thing I like to do with A skips, B skips, whatever, I like to do them resisted. I think to do A skips is a good warm-up, but the problem is it doesn't simulate speed, training speed, because again, I'm never in that straight up and down position. Everything I'm doing with speed training is trying to get that posture this way. So again, a lot of times if you have some resistance where now either at the chest, at the shoulders of a harness, or at the waist, now I can get that forward lean. Now if I'm doing A skips with resisted, I'm just doing either A marches to A skips. Now I have a little bit more similar body posture. So those are the things. Resisted A marches, A skips. Stand up when you're doing your arm action, and then I'll be happy. Competitive speed groups. I'll get right into it. There's a couple different things you can do with these. It's really competitive, and you can do a bunch of different starts. We talk about multiple starts today. Here's one of the things. All right, so I'll explain this. I didn't make this up. John Sist, when he was at Vandy, he is now at Georgia Tech. I'm looking at Tom to give me that. Yes. Anyway, got it from him, and the University of Missouri did it. And I think this is kind of standard for a lot of schools to do it. I don't know if you guys did it at Miami, but basically, we only did 3 at a time because we didn't film it and I couldn't see it. So we did 3, but basically I'll explain this. now you have basically that top line to starting line. So I'm going to go ahead and when the top line is basically the start line. So again, based on last week, I just put, in the first week, you just have 3 people up. So now what we're going to do, old school, and we're going to race. I think you could probably get a lot more competitive drills if you get people to race instead of getting them on a stopwatch. But they're going to go ahead and race. So what happens is when I have them in a group, I'm going to make sure that the coach is usually going to be on this side, on the third place side, right? So you get them up, you say go, they're going to go and race through. You have another coach at the other side. You can do multiple starts. You can do your leg starts, you can do your lateral starts, whatever you need to do. You have a coach on the other side at the finish line. And what he's going to do is either he's going to just, a lot of times we had coaches yelling out who won, but some of your more advanced team, they knew who won, right? So all they're going to do is race. Athlete 2 wins the race, right? So basically 2, 3, 1 was the order they finished. The next time up, when they get back in the starting line, either opposite or back to where they started, now we'll line up. They'll leapfrog. So now athlete 2 who won the race, he's the farthest away. He's in a pole position. He's in that first one. Now it's an actual, I'm actually in the position. I won, and every one of my teammates know I won. And you know that as strength coaches, we are trying to foster competition, safe competition, as much as possible, right? And this is the way to do it. So again, 2 through 1, that's how they finished. So that third place guy, he knows that third place girl, he knows that they lost. So now the coach on the opposite side, because when they finish, it's easier to see with the faster guys away from them, right? So the next time up, they're going to race again. A couple options you can do as coaches, and I'll go through this quickly. So if you have questions, just ask me after. I'm going to go over time here. The other thing you can do is you can go ahead and leapfrog, or you can actually switch the line. So if I'm in third place, right? Say we raced third place, right? You get bumped down the line, right? Say you 3 raced, he won, he gets bumped up. Does that make sense? So now I have a way. If I'm in the third line, and you can base this on position, based on last week's result, whatever. If I'm in that third line, I have a way I can move up. If I'm running my ass off, I'm working hard, I can actually move up. So it's a way to get very competitive. You can do any number. We just use 3. But one thing you can do is that when you do your races, to keep it your work to rest ratio, just time the first group. From the time they finish to the time they go again, look at it, see where you're at. You know what I mean? And then you can kind of look to say, okay, they're running. You know, that's the old Charlie Francis. For every 10 yards, every second of the race, it should be a minute rest. I think you cut it in half, you'd still be okay. So again, if I'm running a 30, which should take me 3 to 4 seconds, 2 minutes rest I think is adequate. But at least you can check it. You can check where you're at. So that's the way to do that. Anybody questions with that? With the speed groups, right? It's a way to be competitive. Agility training, split up between speed and power cuts. And I'll go through this. 2 drills I'll give you. So hopefully you leave here, maybe you have 2 drills. My drills weren't as crazy as Gary's because, again, we had too many athletes at one time. So what we end up doing is now we have an area, as long as we have 3 gym courts, or if you have an entire football field, or if you have an entire track area, if you can measure out 5 yards, right, and 5 yards between, that's how you have your cones set up. Now, I can have, again, if I have a team of 50, I can get as many, if I want, 5 per line, I can set up 11 cones and get them ready. So, no matter what, this is maybe a better issue. I'm not saying these drills are better at developing agility or change of direction than any others. I'm just saying that this is the way to get a lot of athletes going at once. Make sure you leave a line open. And really what happens is now you can go through your different drills, your end drills, you name them up, right? Just basically 4 cone drills, spell whatever letter you want to spell, add in some shuffling type stuff, whatever. So what happens is now all these athletes end up on this side of the cone, right? Or if you're doing like a, whatever drill, an L drill, they might end up where the same line they are. You just have to be aware of where they end up. And then basically from there, go to the next one. If you want them to go the other direction, slide them all down the line. You don't move any cones, don't move anybody. You just have to make sure that they know what cones are starting, what drill they're doing. So that's one way you can do it, right? A lot of people doing a lot of different training directions, you're still able to coach them up. You're doing power cuts. Here's one thing to think about. I got to finish up. One thing to think about. We are married to this 5-10-5. Start in the middle, go one way or another. Okay? One thing we found was because, again, if you can imagine this line being adding about, for some groups, adding about 60 more of those blue X's. Right? It's hard to have it so everybody's starting on the middle line and go and change the direction. So what ended up happening, we started everybody down here, and we're able to move people pretty quickly because we're able to finish on the opposite side. So imagine those three athletes. They could be facing forward. There's your lateral starts, right? They're usually facing forward, and now again, on the go, audio stimulus, visual stimulus, whatever you want. Now what happens is they're going maybe, say, 10, 5, then back 10, and then jogging all the way down to the opposite line, right? So now what happens is this. I got my first group up. I'm going to go 10, come back 5, and sprint again. I can start the next group before that other group finishes. That makes sense? So if I do have 50, 60 athletes at one time, I can really reduce that rest interval down a little bit. Usually we go the other way. Usually we don't give them enough rest. But again, now we can get to a position where we can get a lot of athletes going through at once. So it's just one way. Now again, all it does is the same setup with the cones, right? Just cones every 5 yards. If you do pro agility shuttles, you need 10 yards for every. Make sure everyone's going in the right direction. But you need 10 yards for every athlete. So again, for 30 yards, I can get 3 groups going at once. But it's going to be slower because you have to get them time to set up. Does that make sense? So again, once one group goes, the next group comes up. So those are 2 ways to think about it. So you have the 4-cone drill, you have the ladder shuttles, and you have the pro agility type shuttles. There's a list of the different ones you can do with the ladder shuttles. Again, you can go up to a 40-yard shuttle, 15, 10, 15. So it just is based on you. But again, if you're worried about them getting better to 5, 10, 5 or pro agility or 3-cone, then you have to train that. If you want them to get better or change of direction, then you can set up whatever way you can to get the most athletes getting the most reps at once. Nothing worse than after an hour-long session, you have an athlete who only had 4 reps. Right? You don't need 20, but they should get more than 3 or 4. Okay? Final thoughts. I'm sorry. Lauren, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I went over. Couple things. Jeremy Boone. 2 more slides. Jeremy Boone. That's what Gary had referenced. These are one of the things that really set with me. Every time, whether you're speaking, coaching, teaching, it doesn't matter. Bring the 5 E's. I think that's one of the things that really set. I have it written up on my board. And then here's my 5 attitude check. These are all by Brian Kane. Brian Kane, Peak Performance. Process over outcome. Functions over feelings, right? Don't worry about what your athletes are feeling about the workout. Make sure they know that they're doing the workout the best ability they can, right? It's not about how you feel about something. No one cares about how you feel, right? If you're really if you need to, do a status on Facebook so you see how many likes you get, that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But from a coaching standpoint, performance standpoint, it's not about feelings, it's about function. Have to get to, right? Change your have to get to, okay? You get in a situation where I have to wake up early, I have to open up the weight room, I have to, I have to train these kids, I got to stay late because I got a couple injured kids that have to come in. You get to train athletes at 5:30 a.m., right? You get to have a 12-hour workday where you're helping athletes get better, right? Changing your attitude from have to get to, and then they compare to what? This is one thing I really realized too. After I was just complaining so much about whatever, I always say, every time I say it's compared to what? Right? Well, I'm so busy, I have so much to do. Well, compared to what? Compared to a single mom with 2 kids and 2 jobs? Am I really that busy? Dude, my day sucked today. I had a shitty day today. Well, compared to what? Compared to some of our brothers and sisters over in Afghanistan? I'm sure my day sucked that bad, right? Compared to what? Right? And that's one of the things that helped me. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. You can call me, email me, I'll give you my card, anything you ever need. This is why I'm in this business, is to help people and do anything I can to help them. What I can do for you, I don't know, but I'll always do my best to go out of my way to do whatever I can to help anyone out. That's why I'm in the position where I am. That's why I asked Dave Tate to hire me on, because I knew I could help some people. And again, thanks to Tom the NSCA that's done so much to really help get coaches involved in a profession that's really a tough profession that has chewed a lot of people out, chewed a lot of people up and spit them out. And it was one of those things that we need to continue to get better as a profession, and we need to be able to understand that. Again, don't let people that you've earned everything you get, right? And anytime you give someone something they don't deserve, you're ruining it. Anytime that someone does a weekend certification, they call themselves coach, they're less of a person. Not because they're bad, not because it's their fault, but they got something they don't deserve, right? Anytime you get something you don't deserve, you're less of a person. So again, make sure that, the NSCA is helping to legitimize our profession. Obviously, Dave, take all my former interns that helped me and my family. So I appreciate it. I'm sorry I went over.